Imagine walking away from the glitter of a black tie gala, the kind of night meant for champagne and applause, only to find yourself standing in a rain-soaked alley face to face with a little girl curled inside a cardboard box. She is barefoot, clutching a broken teddy bear, and when she finally speaks, her words cut deeper than any silence. "You just talk nicer than most." For Graham Mitchell, a man who once believed money could protect him from pain, that moment shattered the walls he had built around his grief. What he chose to do next did not just change her life, it saved his own. This is not a story about wealth or power. It is about the courage to stop, to see, and to stay when it matters most. Stay with us and subscribe to Loss and Healing, because sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest light. That night was supposed to be about legacy, about remembering two lives that defined him, about speeches and polished glasses raised in honor, but Graham Mitchell could not bring himself to walk into that ballroom again, not on this third anniversary. His name was on the marquee, his foundation's gala was underway, and cameras flashed as if the world had no cracks. Yet, standing at the edge of the valet circle, he felt like an imposter in his own life. The faces smiling inside that grand hall did not know what it meant to live with an absence that devoured every morning and haunted every night. He turned away, his footsteps carrying him from marble staircases and velvet curtains to the open night air. At first, he only intended to drive, to let the rhythm of tires on asphalt numb his mind. But the farther he went from the polished heart of Seattle, the more he felt pulled down into the hidden veins of the city. He crossed bridges that arched like ribs over the dark water, past neighborhoods where neon buzzed above shuttered shops, and drifted into streets where puddles swallowed reflections of broken signs. His luxury car seemed foreign here, out of place, humming across cracked pavement like a ghost among the living. Still, he kept going. Tonight, he was not CEO, not host, not benefactor. He was only a man fleeing the suffocating applause of a world that demanded smiles he no longer had. The drizzle painted his windshield in soft streaks, and each stoplight blinked against his tired eyes like reminders of the life he could not return to. He parked without intention, a few blocks from Pike Place Market, and stepped out into the damp night. The sidewalks glistened, reflecting stray bursts of red and green neon, the scattered silhouettes of those who had nowhere else to go. Graham shoved his hands deep into his coat pockets, the chill biting his knuckles as he walked. The air smelled of salt, gasoline, and something unwashed, a mixture that did not belong to any gala but to survival itself. And somehow, that was where he wanted to be. For the first time in years, he wanted to feel the rawness of life. The alleys grew narrower, darker. Trash cans rattled somewhere unseen, a siren wailed from blocks away, and the low roar of the city seemed to fade into a pulse that belonged only to the shadows. A small fire flickered inside a dented barrel at the far end of a lane, sending orange light dancing across damp brick walls. Graham hesitated, his shoes splashing lightly in a puddle, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the stillness. "What am I doing here?" he muttered under his breath. But the words were not for the city nor for anyone else. They were for himself, a confession of a man who had been wandering through grief for too long, searching for something he could not name. That was when he heard it. A sound so faint, it almost disappeared into the drizzle. A rustle, like paper shifting or fabric being pulled tighter. His body tensed, and he scanned the shadows. Just past a leaning stack of wooden pallets, beside a dumpster streaked with rust, there was a shape. A box, sagging from the rain, pressed into the corner of the wall. Graham took a cautious step closer, and then another. His breath caught. Inside that box was a child. She was curled into herself, knees pulled to her chest, as if trying to fold into invisibility. Bare feet stuck out, red from the cold. Her oversized hoodie, damp and sagging at the sleeves, made her look even smaller. In her arms, she clutched a stuffed bear, its one eye missing, its seams frayed. For a moment, Graham could not move. The sight was too sharp, too sudden. His first instinct was disbelief. This should not be here, not in his city, not in his world. But denial could not erase the image of a little girl sleeping inside cardboard. He opened his mouth, unsure what to say, when she spoke first. Her voice was calm, too calm, carrying a weary knowledge no 6-year-old should have. "You're not the first man who looked sad and walked by," she said without opening her eyes. But I guess you talk nicer than most. The words struck him harder than any insult. They were not laced with anger or fear, but with a resignation that sliced deeper. She had already learned to expect nothing. His knees bent almost without thought, and he crouched, careful not to make sudden movements. "Hey," he said softly, his voice breaking against the night. "It's cold out here. I'm not going to hurt you." She did not open her eyes, but her grip tightened around the bear. Her lips twitched as she murmured, "You don't need to pretend I don't exist. Most people do that part real good." He felt the words in his chest like an ache, sharper than the memory of champagne glasses clinking under the portrait of his wife and daughter. "I'm not pretending," he whispered. That was when she opened one eye, sharp and heavy with something no child should carry. She studied him, as though he were the one being judged, as though the decision to speak further belonged entirely to her. "You smell like hotel soap," she said, her tone flat, unflinching. He blinked, then managed a faint smile. "I guess I do. Means you don't live down here. So why are you here?" The question landed heavier than he expected. His throat tightened, and he had no real answer. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Then go back to your hotel soap world." He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his chest. She was right. He did not belong here, not among wet concrete and empty boxes. Yet something in him stirred, something that told him perhaps this was the only place he had belonged in years. Because in her weary eyes, he saw a reflection of himself. Someone surviving in a world that had already taken too much. A gust of wind swept through the alley, lifting scraps of paper and chilling the air. Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out the scarf he had carried unused for months. He held it out, hesitating. "Can I give you something warm?" Her hand moved slowly, cautiously, before she snatched it and pulled it close. He stayed crouched, saying nothing more, letting the silence speak. For years he had been drowning in a silence that hollowed his penthouse, his bed, his life. But this silence was different. This was a silence of two survivors sitting on opposite sides of an impossible gulf, almost daring to bridge it. The drizzle thickened into a soft rain, each drop tapping against the box like a lullaby that offered no comfort. Graham knew he should walk away. He had no business here, no place in this alley. But as he looked at the little girl curled around her bear, wrapped now in his scarf, he realized he could not leave. Not tonight, maybe not ever. Something inside him, something he thought was buried with Claire, and alas shifted, fragile but undeniable. The night was no longer about legacy or remembrance.
What are you doing with your car?
It was about a choice, one he would not be able to undo. Graham did not sleep that night. He changed into his gray cotton shirt, brushed his teeth by habit, and stretched across a bed that had felt empty for 3 years. Yet even with the city lights glowing faintly through the tall windows, his mind refused to rest. Each time he shut his eyes, he saw hers. A single cracked eyelid in the shadows of an alley, watching him as if she could read the truth behind his silence. Her words replayed like an echo carved into the hollow walls of his chest. "You just talk nicer than most." It was not a compliment, it was a statement of survival. By 4 a.m, he gave up on the idea of rest. He drifted through his penthouse like a man pacing a cage. The sleek design, once a testament to his control and success, now seemed suffocating. He pressed his palm against the cold glass of the window, staring out over the city. The Space Needle stood like a sentinel, but Graham barely saw it. The silence, polished and curated, had become unbearable. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, its bitter scent filling the air, reminding him of mornings that used to pulse with laughter and movement. He did not touch the cup. Instead, he opened his laptop, pretending to scan emails, pretending to be the executive the world expected him to be. The words on the screen blurred. All he could see was a cardboard box sagging under drizzle. By the time dawn pushed faint light into the sky, he gave in. He dialed Alicia, his assistant, who picked up quickly, her voice precise despite the hour. "Mr. Mitchell, is everything all right?" He hesitated. He never called her this early, never outside business. His throat tightened before he answered. "I need you to look into something." He described the alley near Pike Place, the small figure he had found. Alicia's silence on the other end was not confusion but curiosity. "You have never asked me about anything like this before," she said gently. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "I know. I saw a girl last night. Alone, maybe 6, sleeping in a box." Her voice shifted, softer. "Should I contact outreach services?" "Not yet," he said quickly. I went back. The admission surprised even him. Hours before dawn, he had returned. The box was still there, and so was she. It was as if the city had frozen around her, a monument of survival hidden in plain sight. Alicia promised to dig discreetly, and Graham ended the call, standing motionless in the kitchen with his coat half-buttoned. He already knew where he was going. 10 minutes later, his SUV pulled to the same curb, and the same flickering alley light welcomed him back. She was awake this time, sitting upright, clutching the bear-like armor. Her gaze met his the moment he stepped closer. "You came back," she said, her voice flat. Not yet trustful, but not rejecting either. Graham crouched again, careful in every movement. Yeah, couldn't sleep much. She blinked, her small body trembling from the cold. Me, neither. In daylight, she looked even smaller, her frame fragile against the damp stone wall. He asked her name gently. She weighed the question as if deciding its cost, then whispered, "Maddie." He nodded, smiling faintly. "That is a good name. Mine is Graham." She tilted her head, studying him. "You do not look like a Graham." For the first time in years, he smiled without forcing it. "What do I look like?" She shrugged. "Someone who does not belong in an alley." He could not argue. She looked down at her shoes if they could be called shoes.
Can anyone hear me?
One was missing a sole, the other held together with tape. He asked softly about her mother. Maddie's voice dropped lower. "She is behind the building.
Yes.
She does not wake up sometimes." Graham's chest tightened. He asked if she wanted him to help her mother. She shook her head quickly. "No hospitals, they cost too much." Her words were steady, but her fingers twisted the fabric of her hoodie. He pressed further, his tone careful. "What if someone else paid?" She hesitated, eyes narrow, as if measuring whether he was another false promise. "People always say they will help. Then they do not come back." He looked at her steady. "I came back." Something flickered in her gaze then, a sliver of recognition. Maddie drew her arms into her sleeves, her bare pressed to her chest. "Are you going to take me away?" she asked. "Not unless you want to go," he said softly. She studied him, then whispered, "Okay, but only if I can bring Bear." He nodded. "Of course." Her small frame stood shakily, the scarf he had given her still wrapped around her shoulders. The sight nearly undid him. As they began walking toward the back of the building, she glanced up at him, her eyes sharper than her years.
What is it?
"You are not really here to help, are you?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You are here because you cannot sleep either." He stopped mid-step, her words sinking deeper than she could know. She had read him, as though loneliness had its own scent she could recognize instantly. "Yeah,"
How long?
he admitted. "That is exactly
few
why
minutes.
I am here." Maddie did not reply. She simply led him deeper into the alley, her steps soundless on the wet pavement, her hand clutching the frayed paw of her bear. Graham followed, realizing that whatever road he was now on, he could not turn back. The girl in the box had tethered him to something real, something raw, something he had not felt in 3 long years. And for the first time, he wanted to keep walking.
It is okay.
The
You
world
are safe
Maddie
now.
led him into was hidden from the polished streets above, as if the city itself tried to forget it existed. The narrow
We're almost
passage
there.
behind the
Just a few more
crumbling brick
minutes.
walls smelled of mildew and rust. A plastic tarp sagged across one side like a makeshift curtain, the kind of barrier meant to pretend at privacy
You can
but
rely on
failing
me.
miserably. Maddie pushed it aside with the small defiance of someone who had done it many times before. Inside was a space no wider than a hallway, closed in on 3 sides. The sound of rain trickled down from a broken drain pipe, collecting in a shallow pool near the back. A thin mattress lay on the concrete, stained and sagging, surrounded by piles of damp blankets and cast-off clothing. A lantern flickered weakly in the corner, its light barely clinging to life. And there, under a faded floral sheet, was a woman. Maddie went to her without hesitation,
How long has
brushing a
this pain been
strand
going
of
on?
wet hair from her
Just a few
forehead.
hours.
"She has been
And are you
tired,"
allergic to
Maddie
any
whispered.
medications?
Graham stepped closer, the
Authorization
weight of
granted.
the air
Thank
pressing on him. The woman's skin was pale, her lips cracked, her body trembling even in sleep. Graham's chest ached at the sight. "How long has she been like this?" he asked quietly. Maddie's voice cracked. 2 days? Last time she woke up, she told me not to be scared." The girl knelt beside her mother, fingers
You know I
smoothing
care
the
about you
sheet
so
in small
much.
circles, as if that alone could
Here's
steady
a
her
warm blanket
breathing.
for you.
Graham crouched,
And some
his
water, too.
instincts urging him to check for a pulse. It was faint, but there, relief mixed with panic. He scanned the small space, seeing no food, no clean water, nothing that resembled safety. He could not understand how they had survived this long. Maddie shuffled over to a paper bag in the corner and returned with something small in her hands. She held it out to him, a piece of stale bread with the crust torn away. "It is old, but I did not touch the inside," she said.
You're going to be all right,
"You can have it." Her voice was matter-of-fact, offering him what little she had. Graham took it carefully, his throat tightening. The simplicity of the gift, the unguarded generosity of a child with nothing, nearly broke him. "Thank you," he said, his voice unsteady. "That is more than most have given me." Maddie only nodded, not smiling, not expecting praise. This was survival, stripped bare. The moment stretched. He stared at the bread in his hands, then at the fragile figures in front of him. He knew what he had to do. "This place is not safe," he said gently. Maddie looked back at her mother, then at him.
We are so glad
She
you were
said
back.
no hospitals. "Too much money," Graham exhaled, steadying himself. "I can help, I promise." Maddie's eyes narrowed, a sharpness far older than 6 years. "You are not going to leave like the others?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not this time." He pulled out his phone, his voice steady as he spoke to the dispatcher. He gave them the location, the condition, every detail he could. While he spoke, Maddie sat silently, her fingers tightening around her bear. She did not stop him, though her watchful gaze never left his face. Minutes crawled by. The rain outside softened, but inside the air grew heavier with each shallow breath from Isabel. Graham sat on the damp floor, his coat pressed against cold cement. Maddie crouched beside her mother, stroking her hair with delicate care. At last, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. Maddie's grip on her bear tightened, her body going still. When the EMTs arrived, they worked swiftly, professional but brisk. They loaded Isabel onto a stretcher, asking questions Graham answered without hesitation. They assumed he was family. He did not correct them. Maddie tugged at his coat, her voice small. "She does not wake up when I talk to her." "Maybe you try." Graham leaned close, taking Isabel's hand.
Okay, so here
"Your
are
daughter has been
resources that
so
might be
brave,"
helpful. We will
he said
focus on these
softly.
first.
"She brought me here. You are not alone anymore."
I will take care
For a
of the
moment,
immediate
her
costs and
eyelids
paperwork.
fluttered, the faintest twitch. Maddie saw it. Her eyes widened,
visit
hope
every
flickering
day?
like a fragile
Yes, you can.
flame. They followed the stretcher out into the rain. Graham stayed close, Maddie clutching her bear as she trailed beside him. The ambulance doors opened and Maddie hesitated.
Which juice would you
"Can I
like,
ride
little
with
one?
her?"
That one.
she asked in a whisper. "Of course," he said, lifting her carefully inside. He climbed in after her, sitting across from Isabel as paramedics worked around them. Maddie perched on the bench, her legs dangling, her bear clutched like a shield. She said nothing more. Neither did he. But Graham knew something inside him had already shifted. This was no longer just an act of kindness. This was a tether pulling him into a story he could not walk away from. The hospital lights glared as they wheeled Isabel through the automatic doors. Nurses swarmed with clipped instructions, questions flying faster than Graham could answer. He gave what details he knew, his voice low but firm. When asked about payment authorization, he did not hesitate. His name, his wealth, his influence, things that once
We can
felt
discuss
hollow
some
now,
options for short-term
served a
care,
purpose.
if that's something you're interested
Isabel was admitted not as another forgotten case, but as someone who mattered, someone he had chosen to see. Maddie clung to his side, silent but steady. Her eyes flicked from her mother to Graham, as if testing whether he would keep his word. And though fear churned in his chest, he knew the truth. He had stayed, and he would keep staying, no matter how messy or uncertain the road ahead. When Graham stepped
Certainly.
into the
We have
ICU
several
room,
options
the
available.
world seemed to hold its breath. The machines hummed steadily, casting a sterile rhythm into the air. But all he could see was Isabel
good to get
lying
some
there,
fresh air,
pale
isn't it?
and frail, yet undeniably alive. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy at first, then
Could you please
sharpening with
follow up on that
confusion
request,
as they
sir?
landed on him. Her lips parted, cracked and dry. "You are not a doctor," she whispered. Graham's throat tightened. "No," he said quietly. "I am a friend." It felt strange to use the word, yet it was the only one that seemed to fit. Her gaze shifted, desperate and searching. "Where is Maddie?" she rasped. "She is safe," Graham reassured her. "At my home. She has been with me these past few days."
Here.
He
have
watched
some
the
water.
tension in Isabel's face soften, though her hand trembled against the blanket as she tried to form words. "She trusts you," she breathed. "She does," Graham said softly, "and I trust her." Tears gathered in her tired eyes, spilling slowly down her temples. I did not know what else to do, she admitted,
People
voice
like
breaking.
me
I could not get up
never
anymore.
stay.
I did not want to scare her. Graham sat down beside her, folding his hands to keep them steady. You did everything you could, he told her. She is strong. So are you. For a long time, they sat in silence, the steady beep of the monitor filling the space between them. Outside the window, leaves rustled in a faint breeze, a reminder that life continued even in the quietest corners of despair. The doctor arrived with charts, his tone brisk but measured. Vitals are stabilizing, hydration levels improving. She is weak, but the treatment is working. His words carried relief, but also the gravity of how close it had been. Another 2 days, and the outcome might have been different. Graham did not need the reminder. He had seen enough in that alley to understand how fragile survival could be. After the doctor left, Isabel turned back to him. Why would you help us? She asked, her eyes sharp despite her exhaustion. Graham hesitated, searching for the right words. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter, he confessed. Every day since, I have pretended it wasn't the end of everything that mattered.
I'm scared.
Then I found Maddie in a box with a bear missing an eye and a voice too wise for her years. And something in me that I thought was dead began to stir again. The tears in Isabel's eyes deepened, her chest rising with shallow but steady breaths. She didn't beg, Graham continued. She didn't cry. She just told me the truth. And I could not walk away. Isabel nodded faintly, her lips
I made
trembling.
cocoa.
Even when I had nothing left, she whispered. I could not leave her. She is my reason. Graham felt the words in his bones, echoing his own grief, his own reason for staying in that alley when he should have kept walking. He told her how Maddie still clutched her bear at night, how she had started leaving drawings around his home lighthouses, houses with glowing windows, families of stick figures standing under bright skies.
I like this red
Isabel
one.
smiled weakly when he mentioned the bear. His name is Howard, she said softly. He used to talk. He went quiet after her last birthday. Her laugh cracked, but it was real, and it lit the sterile room like sunlight sneaking past a storm cloud. Later that day, when Maddie entered the hospital room, she ran straight into her mother's arms, sobbing and laughing all at once. Isabel held her with a trembling but fierce grip, kissing her hair over and over. Graham stood in the doorway, his heart pounding as if witnessing something sacred. It felt like watching the first sunrise after years of endless night. Maddie pulled back, her face shining with tears, and said, I told her you stayed. Isabel looked at Graham, her eyes glistening with gratitude and
One day, I'll
disbelief.
call you Daddy.
You really stayed? He
What if
nodded,
one day I call you
his
Daddy?
voice low. I said I
promise.
would.
I'll always
That
be there
night,
tomorrow.
back in his penthouse, the space felt different. Maddie's blanket was draped across the couch, her
Promise.
drawings scattered on the counter. For the first time in years, it no longer felt like an empty
I
monument.
assure you,
He
it will be
wandered
done.
into the garden, sitting beneath an old oak Claire had planted long ago. The stars blinked faintly above, and for once, the silence was not crushing. He thought about how loss had hollowed him out, how grief had left him numb. But Maddie and Isabel had not filled that void. They had grown something new, something fragile and beautiful, like green shoots breaking through cracked pavement. He pulled out his phone. Alicia had sent a picture. Maddie and Isabel in the hospital room, wearing paper crowns they had made from hospital billing forms, both smiling. Graham laughed softly, a sound he had not heard from himself in years. The laugh did not erase the pain, but it softened its edges. He realized
Can I
then
help you with anything?
that what had begun in
No,
a
thank
rain-soaked alley was not just a rescue, it was a rebirth. The first night Maddie stayed in Graham's penthouse, she did not sleep right away. The guest room was crisp, untouched, too perfect. She sat on the edge of the bed with her bear tucked beneath her chin, eyes darting across the gleaming furniture and polished floor. Graham tried to ease the tension with gentle offers. You can take your shoes off if you like. There are no rules here. She hesitated before slipping out of her tattered sneakers, as though she might be punished for touching something that clean. He brought her a glass of water, adjusted the sheets, but she remained upright, watchful. Finally, he pulled up a chair and sat with her until her breathing slowed. She whispered just before drifting off, People like you never stay. Graham looked at her small frame under the blanket and answered quietly, I am still here, aren't I? She gave the faintest nod before her eyes
Are
closed.
those for me?
Over the next few days, his home began to shift in ways he had not expected. The silence, once heavy as stone, softened with the faint sounds of crayons scratching against paper, the creak of small footsteps across the hall. the hum of a child singing half-remembered songs. Graham had not cooked for anyone in years, yet suddenly he found himself at the stove making scrambled eggs, placing orange juice in front of her as she sat silently at the counter. She did not ask for toys, but her drawings began appearing in the most ordinary corners in the kitchen island, on a windowsill overlooking the city, even tucked beside his laptop. One morning, he found a picture of a lighthouse, purple and blue crayon beams stretching across the page. In shaky block letters, she had written, "Light never goes out." Graham placed it on his office shelf beside the only framed photo he still kept of Claire and Ella. For the first time, it did not feel out of place. One night, as he finished brushing his teeth, he heard a faint sound outside his bedroom door. He opened it to find Maddie curled against the wall, her bear in her lap, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. "I get scared when it is too quiet," she murmured. "I did not want to mess up the bed." His throat tightened.
Love, safety,
"You didn't,"
and trust
he said
are
gently.
all that we need.
When she asked if he promised, he answered without hesitation. He carried her back, tucked her in, and sat beside her until sleep claimed her. That night, he did not return to his own bed. Instead, he stayed in the chair by her side, watching the slow rhythm of her breathing. Dawn came quietly, turning the sky outside her window from gray to silver, but Graham felt something inside him shift. For the first time in years, he did not feel entirely alone. The next morning, he awoke to the smell of cocoa. Bleary-eyed, he wandered into the kitchen to find Maddie on her tiptoes, carefully pressing the button on the milk steamer. 2 mugs sat on the counter, a napkin placed neatly between them. Beside them, another drawing leaned against the wall. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, standing under a yellow sun. She looked up when she saw him. "I made cocoa," she said, as if it were the most ordinary thing. He picked up a cup and smiled quietly. "It is perfect." They drank together in silence, the city waking slowly beyond the glass windows. No news alerts, no calls, no reminders of the empire he had built. Just the scrape of crayon against paper as Maddie added a dog to the picture, lopsided and endearing.
This is great.
Later that day, he took her shopping at a small boutique nearby. She hung back at first, unwilling to touch anything. "You can choose what you need," he told her. "Shoes, pajamas, anything you like." After a long silence, she picked a simple hoodie and soft leggings. "These are warm," she explained.
Welcome.
When they returned, she placed the bag in the corner of the guest room without unpacking it. Graham did not press. That evening, while he worked briefly in his office, she slid a folded piece of paper under his door. Inside was another drawing, 3 figures again, but now a house stood behind them, its windows glowing, flowers lining the sidewalk. Above it, in determined block letters, she had written "Home." Below, 3 names: Maddie, Mommy, Graham. He held the paper for a long time, his fingers trembling. She had not said it aloud, but she had named him part of her world. Days stretched into a new rhythm. Graham canceled meetings, delegated responsibilities, telling Alicia firmly, "Everything waits. I will not be in the office." She asked if everything was all right. His answer was honest. "No, but it will be." He spent mornings cooking, afternoons drawing with Maddie, evenings telling her stories. One night, he spoke of a lighthouse keeper who never left his post, even in storms, so that ships could find their way home. Maddie blinked up at him, her body sinking deeper into the pillows. "That is a sad story," she whispered. "No," Graham said softly. "It is about showing up even when it is hard." She studied him, then asked quietly, "Do people like you ever stay?" He swallowed, his chest tight. "I am still here, aren't I?" She nodded once before her eyes closed, her bear clutched tight.
Oh my goodness.
Graham remained in the chair long after she slept, watching her as though her very breath was the most fragile and precious thing in the world. One evening, after another simple dinner together, Maddie spun barefoot across the rug in her new pajamas, arms outstretched. "I never had my own room before," she said breathlessly, her face glowing.
This is really nice.
Graham leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "You do now," he told her. She stopped twirling, eyes wide and serious. "What if I call you Daddy one day? Will you still be here the next?" His heart clenched. He knelt so that their eyes met, his voice steady. "I will always be here the next day, even if I am late, even if I mess up.
Oh, you're so
You will not
silly.
ever be alone again." She studied his face carefully, then whispered,
God, what
"Promise?"
happened here?
Promise? He said. That night, she fell asleep more quickly than usual, her hand resting against his arm as though anchoring herself. Across the hall, Isabel watched from the doorway, her gaze unreadable but full of something close to relief. For Graham, the question Maddie had asked echoed louder than any boardroom challenge or gala speech. It was not about business, wealth, or reputation. It was about the simple act of staying.
Did you see that?
And as he looked at her drawings taped to the wall,
amazing.
the hoodie folded neatly in the corner, the crayon marks smudged on the table, he realized that staying was the one promise he had never been able to keep before.
I know.
Now, with Maddie's trust stitched into every fragile moment, he knew it was the only promise that mattered. Spring in Seattle carried its own kind of deception. The sky stayed gray. Drizzle stitched the days together, and the air smelled of wet concrete. Yet inside Graham's world, something had quietly shifted. The silence that once pressed on him like a weight had become filled with new textures. It was in the sound of Maddie humming to herself as she brushed her teeth, in the smell of toast that burned slightly because she insisted on preparing breakfast alone, in the soft laughter Isabel sometimes let slip when Maddie made a terrible joke. It was not perfection, but it was life, messy and unpolished, and it startled him to realize how much he wanted it. Isabel had grown stronger. Though her body still carried the scars of exhaustion and malnutrition, her spirit was no longer dimmed. She refused to remain a guest in Graham's penthouse. "I need to contribute," she told him one morning, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she folded laundry Maddie had left in a heap. Graham studied her, hesitant, yet he understood. She wanted more than survival, she wanted dignity. So he offered her a small cafe tucked into the lobby of one of his older hotels, a place that had long since stopped needing his attention. She accepted, and soon the quiet shop filled with new warmth. Isabel wore an apron Maddie had decorated with fabric markers, and every morning she welcomed guests, her rhythm slow but steady. Graham often sat by the window, sipping black coffee and watching her move behind the counter. Their eyes met sometimes, no words exchanged, but in that silence was a shared understanding that neither of them had arrived at this moment easily. Meanwhile, Maddie began school. Her backpack seemed larger than her body, yet she carried it with pride. One afternoon, she climbed into the car, her face bright. "I have a best friend now," she announced. "Her name is Laya. She says my sandwich is fancy." Graham chuckled, remembering the careful way he had cut the bread into neat shapes. "Not everyone gets cucumber stars," he teased. Maddie grinned, swinging her legs. When they reached home, she ran ahead to the front gate, calling for him to notice. Nailed to the wood was a new sign, painted with uneven strokes only a child could make. "The Mitchell family, where love lives." The paint was still tacky, the letters crooked, the heart above the M slightly smeared. Graham stood there for a long time, his chest tightening as he traced the lines with his fingertips. It was imperfect, and it was everything. That evening, they ate dinner under strings of fairy lights. Maddie had begged him to order online.
Good morning. How can
The
I help
garden
you today?
smelled of jasmine. The table cluttered with grilled cheese sandwiches and a lopsided chocolate cake Maddie insisted was homemade. She told knock-knock jokes so absurd that Graham groaned loudly after each one, which only made her laugh harder. Isabel watched them, her eyes soft. Later, Maddie crawled into Graham's lap, her cheek pressed against his chest, resisting bedtime with practiced stubbornness. "Do you know what I remember most about the box?" she asked suddenly. He looked down, brushing a curl from her forehead. "What?"
This is wonderful.
"I could hear people walk by, but
so
no one
happy
ever
to be
stopped
here."
long enough for me to hear them breathe.
what I mean.
But I heard you breathe." His chest ached at her words. He kissed the top of her head. "That's because I was finally ready to live again." Maddie smiled sleepily. "I'm glad you saw my box." Graham held her closer. "You were never just a girl in a box, Maddie. You were the reason I came back to life." Beside them, Isabel set down her tea, her gaze filled with light. For the first time, Graham felt
And they
it
lived
deep and
happily
certain.
ever
This
after.
was not only healing, this was home. Weeks later, Isabel confessed
And they
quietly in
lived
the
happily
kitchen one
ever
evening,
after.
her hands drying
The end.
dishes. "I will never be the same," she said. "The doctors warned me. My body may never fully recover." Graham rinsed a plate and handed it to her. "You don't need to be the same," he answered. "You only need to be here." She turned, her eyes shimmering. "She needs
Oh,
more
no,
than I can
not
give."
again.
Graham placed the towel down and stepped closer.
So
You've already
delicious.
given her everything that matters. Love, safety, trust. Isabel's shoulders trembled as she leaned against the counter, and now she looks at you the way she used to look at me, before things got bad. Graham shook his head softly. I will never try to replace you. That's not what this is. Isabel studied his face, then whispered, That's why I think you may be the one she needs. He swallowed hard, his
My
chest
family
heavy
is my
with
top
both
priority.
fear and hope. He thought of Maddie's drawings, of her question about whether he would still be there tomorrow. If it's all right with you, he said carefully, I'd like to speak to a lawyer. Not to take her away, just to make it official, in case anything ever happens again. Isabel nodded slowly, tears running freely now. You already are her safe place, she said. I think she has known that longer than I have. The next
call you
day,
Daddy
Graham
one day?
took Maddie shopping for decorations. At first, he called it your space or your corner, but she caught on quickly. It's my room, she declared, selecting star-shaped lights, a comforter with unicorns, and a beanbag shaped like an avocado. That night, she twirled barefoot on the rug, her laughter filling the air.
Do you need a hand with that?
I never had my own room before, she said again, breathless with joy.
Look, it's
Graham
mine.
stood in the doorway,
This is
arms
so much
folded,
fun.
marveling. She stopped spinning suddenly, her expression serious. If I call you Daddy one day, will you still be here the next? He knelt so their eyes were level, his voice steady. I will always be here the next day, even if I'm late, even if I get it wrong. You will never be alone again. She searched his face, then whispered, Promise? Promise, he said firmly. That night, she fell asleep with a smile,
feels like
her
home.
drawings taped proudly to the walls of the room she now called her own. As Graham watched over her, Isabel lingered in the doorway, silent. Their eyes met. In hers, he saw gratitude, hesitation, and something like trust. He realized then that the promise he had made to Maddie was also a promise to himself, that he would no longer run from the messy, unpolished truth of love. For years, he had thought legacy was about buildings and endowments. Now he understood it was about choosing to stay, about being present when it mattered most. And as the rain
you for
pattered
staying.
softly against the windows, Graham Mitchell finally
I
let
will
himself
always stay with
believe
you.
in tomorrow. Some stories are not about fortune or status. They are about a single
initials here.
choice, the decision,
All right.
to stop, to see, and to stay. Graham Mitchell once thought his life was defined by success, by black tie galas and towering glass buildings bearing his name. But the night he saw a little girl in a cardboard box, the ground beneath him shifted. What began as a glance into a shadowed alley became a journey back into his own humanity. Maddie, with her tired eyes and quiet strength, taught him that hope does not always come wrapped in perfection.
And then the
Sometimes it comes in the
Where's my
fragile
helmet?
voice of a child asking
Oh
if
my
you will
gosh,
still
that's
be there
hilarious.
tomorrow.
You're so
Through
sweet,
her,
Dad.
Graham discovered that healing is not about erasing the past. It is about allowing broken pieces to find a new shape together. Isabel, weary but resilient, showed him that love endures even when bodies fail, and that dignity can rise even from the coldest concrete. Together, they reminded him that legacy is not the applause of a ballroom, but the laughter at a dinner table. Not the portrait on a wall, but the drawings of a lighthouse
you.
taped beside a window. Legacy is presence. It is staying when it would be easier to walk away. Perhaps you too have known loss, the silence that follows, the emptiness that seems endless. Maybe you have wondered if it is possible to begin again. This story is a reminder that it is. Healing does not come in sudden miracles.
Oh my
It comes in the quiet moments when we choose connection over isolation, when we let the light back in through the cracks. Sometimes the very act of breathing beside another soul is enough to start the world turning again.
Yes, it is.
If this journey touched your heart, if it reminded you of
Can I
the
have more,
power of
please?
kindness and the courage of staying, then let it be more than a story. Share it, carry it, live it. And if you are seeking more stories of resilience, compassion, and the beauty of healing, we invite you to join us. Subscribe to Loss and Healing, a place where voices rise from the shadows and remind us all that we are never truly alone. Your story, too, might be the light someone else is waiting to see.